so let's get to it. 2025 is in full swing. So is Mauricio Pochettino's year with the U.S. in his first ever January camp for the U.S. men's national team's friendlies this month against Venezuela on the 18th and against Costa Rica on the 22nd of the same month. Now, the 24-man roster features 23 MLS players. Pochettino sat down with our Lizzy Becherano to discuss what he thinks will be the most important element moving forward.
You spoke earlier about one of the biggest challenges is the mentality and the belief to win. Why would you consider that the biggest challenge?
Because it's in sport, that is the biggest challenge. Is if you listen all the coaches when go to the national, different country, different national team or different clubs, always the coaches talk about mentality, about the challenge, about to create, that winning mentality, the belief, and that is the true. If we are capable to identify the player, the 26, 20 or 30 players that they share the same mentality, I think we can build a very good group of players with the possibility to compete in our best. It's not only to identify the talent, if not the talent, but also the strong mentality, winning mentality, and that is part of our responsibility also to have the quality to identify, but also to build, to build that in all the teams and in all the players, and I think that is why it's really important, because when we are seeing different national teams, today we talk about Argentina, that is the champion, and are very good players. They have very good players, but for me the most important is the difference is the mentality, how they compete like a group, and the belief that they have, and when they go to the pitch, they go to the war and to defend your badge, your flag, and that is what we need to create, and we need to translate to our player that is not only is going to be a game, soccer game, that need to be one step. We need to go one step forward, to compete better.
And how would you define the U.S. mentality currently?
No, the mentality is really good. I think we find very good mentality, very good culture. Yes, sometimes are moments that you are up and down. The most important is to be consistent. It's always to keep high your capacity, your mentality. But for me, I think the athlete here, the player, they have a very good mentality, and yes, I think we are very, very happy with them.
This upcoming summer, there's a lot of tournaments. Do you think the fact that there's going to be a Club World Cup, will that affect the roster for the Gold Cup?
I don't believe it's going to affect that. We are going to work, and I think players are desperate to come with us, to play for the national team. I think it's a great opportunity also to feel different team that came from different part of the world, how they compete, and that is going to be a very good, opportunity to inspire people and to also to see how. To learn, and for me it's very positive to have the Club World Cup here.
Talking about roster building, when making a roster, when thinking about who to call up, what goes through your head? What are those requirements that you consider before calling up a player?
For me, the most important is how they are performing in the club. It's true that we have different situations that maybe they don't play too much in the club, but we consider it sometimes when we call, because it's an important player for the group, because they can perform, even if they don't play too much. It's always every single we analyze in a different, with different way every single aspect. All the players, we don't use the same, standard or rules to assess the player all in the same way.
And to finish off, you've had one phenomenal player in particular who just won USMNT Player of the Year, Anthony Robinson,
Yes.
please, I would love to know your opinion on how you think he's doing so far this season.
So far, he's doing fantastic. He's doing great. I follow the Premier League, and he's doing fantastic. Well deserved. And of course, for the national team, in the game that we play, he was an important player for us. Well deserved the distinction, and of course, so happy for him because he's not only a great player, a great guy.
All right, obviously a lot to break down there with what we just heard from Mauricio Pochettino and our Lizzy Becherano. But Shaka, what we heard the most is him talk about mentality.
Yeah.
That it's good in the U.S. men's national team, but why is this so big then right now for Pochettino?
First of all, the first thing that strikes me, Pochettino has always known how to sing from the right hymn sheet. He knows what to say and when to say it, and he certainly hasn't lost that skill, that talent. The January transfer window, for me, is always a weird one, or that US camp is always an odd one. All right, I've not played US soccer, playing in Europe, kind of coming away, no international break. Players are in the thick of things with their clubs. Certainly for me, playing in England where there's no Christmas break, having this camp just seemed a little odd. The timing just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, looking in from the outside. But to Pochettino's credit, and again, kind of understanding the dynamic of US soccer, understanding that the European-based players just about pick themselves. You know they're going to be in the squad, or at the very least, very close to it, the majority of them. It gives those players based here in the US, those who are playing MLS and so aren't involved in club action right now, the opportunity to go up against each other and to prove your talent against somebody in that same position or the opposite position to you. And that can maybe give a greater indication as to who Pochettino may want to take, who may be the brightest stars in the US-based players, especially for someone like Pochettino, who this is his first venture into US soccer, and certainly his first venture into international football in general.
So a few things very quickly. Shaq mentioned the January camp. This is nothing new to U.S. soccer. In fact, the only reason they do it is because they have to. They have to fulfill this television contract. That's the reason they do it. There's no other reason. And there's very little value to do it unless you're an American player. If you're an American player, domestic player, you want every single opportunity to get in front of the U.S. men's national team coach that you could possibly have. Why? Because the majority of the roster, as Shaq has said, is now in Europe. They're applying their trade in the biggest of leagues in some very massive clubs. And we've seen these roster call-ups when you maybe have 3 at most MLS players, and 2 of those are goalkeepers, and not starting goalkeepers. So it's trending that way. So if you're an American player, and this is very different from the past because there are past players who can tell you, I got my start in a January camp. I think those days are almost over. We're going to see less and less of those players. So it's very important for these players like a Brian Gutierrez, a Diego Luna, this type of player who right now doesn't have that platform to get in front of the coach, get in front of Pochettino, and press his luck and show him something. That's one. 2 is the mentality. Are we saying the mentality wasn't good before? Because that's what I'm getting out of this. And I've said this, the best collection of American talent that the U.S. men's national team has ever had, on paper. But man, were they soft. And we said it on this show many times. I had Greg Berhalter sitting where you are, across from me, and I told him, I know you heard I called the U.S. men's national team soft, and it was because of you. They're a reflection of you. And I still feel that part of this team has a softness to them. They're hardening, absolutely, but they're not there yet. When your biggest accolade, when you can only hang your hat on beating the worst generation of Mexican players that I've seen in my lifetime. You tell me if I'm wrong, Chris. The worst generation of players. That's what you're hanging your hat on. Those wins.
Yeah.
And you're folding to the likes of Canada in a friendly when they're kicking Christian Pulisic up and down the field. There's no response. You're drawn to New Zealand. You're what the U.S. has always had. And Shaq, correct me if I'm wrong when you played against them. Might have not been the most technical. Might have been the most tactical, but fight, grit, spirit, attitude, they always had that. This team has talent and in spades, but they've lacked that toughness. They've lacked that mentality. So That mentality, Pochettino's saying he wants to instill that in this U.S. men's national team. Love it.
Check.
In total agreement. I'll go even further and say at times it felt like that's the mentalities all the U.S. had. And don't get me wrong, regardless of what U.S. team you're talking about, they've always been sprinklings of talent. You've had your Kobe Jones and your Landon Donovans and DeMarcus Beasleys, but not the wealth of talent that the U.S. has been able to call on for the last 4 or 5 years. Not the wealth of talent of players going over to Europe at a young age, maturing at European clubs, and bringing those experiences back to the U.S. But something has, I think the U.S. has fallen short. Now, I've put it down to, I feel the U.S. has kind of lost its identity. What does U.S. soccer do well? What does the American player do well? No. Now, to your point, back when I was playing, and again, lesser talented squads, but you knew. Everybody was physical. You were in a game for 90 minutes. They could not be bullied. Now you look at the team, extremely talented, but you can get physical. Mm-hmm. You can chase them down. You can rattle some cages, and you can force players into making rash decisions, getting themselves sent off. Any number of those little kind of tricks, dark arts, now all of a sudden are having an effect, which you couldn't for so long.
Yeah, and it seems like Pochettino's trying to figure out that identity that you were talking about as well. The mentality, and I don't want to say he backtracked, but saying like, no, but the U.S. athlete, the player, it's a very good mentality. It's good. But I'm sure good for Pochettino isn't good enough.
Yeah, you know, it's weird because the athlete, the American athlete has a great mentality. Because we watch the Olympics and the Americans dominate a lot of the Olympics, winter, summer. Historically, that's what it's been. There's a winning mentality there. But in world football, you've never had that. You can have the win mentality, but you've never had the actual wins to accompany it.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to go into winning mentality when you know you're not as good as the Spanish, you're not as good as the French, you're not as good as the Germans, you're not as good, historically good as the Italians. That's very difficult, and that's what I think Pochettino's trying to address. There's a winning mentality in the American. We got to tap into it.
But there's also this odd duality for U.S. soccer. Being in CONCACAF, that I think Pochettino will have to figure out how to navigate. Now, rolling the clock back a few years, when Jurgen Klinsmann was in charge, and there was this call for the U.S. soccer, particularly, this is pre-CONCACAF Nations League, so when there weren't qualifiers on, the U.S. could have games against the likes of the Dutch and Germany, etc. And there was this weird call, I thought it was weird, call for the U.S. to be a more possession-based team against the likes of the Dutch, against the likes of and they can't. They simply weren't good enough, didn't have the talent too. But now you contrast that with what's happening in CONCACAF. U.S. comes up against Trinidad and Tobago, you expect the U.S. to dominate possession. Against better opposition, against more meaningful opposition. And I take your point about Mexico right now, so we leave them out of it slightly. But let's say going into an international competition, be it the Copa America, be it the World Cup, all of a sudden now the U.S. are coming up against teams that are far better than them, that have more talent than them. And they have to go from a possession team against other CONCACAF nations to being a more pragmatic, maybe counter-attacking team. And they just haven't been able to balance the two.
Yeah.
That is going to be the biggest ask, I think, for Pochettino, as it will be, dare I say, for some time, for whoever's in charge of the U.S. men's national team.
Yeah, it's a tall task that he's willing to take on, clearly. That's why he took on the job.